think I'm going to get started. It's 2 minutes past 7 and lots of material to cover. My name is Aki. I'm a volunteer and a member of the Calgary Horticultural Society. Welcome to our Seed to Table session, all about beans. The Seed to Table series is offered in partnership with the City of Calgary. The focus is on eliminating waste and pollution and conserving resources. It is a shift from a throwaway mindset to one that extends the life cycle of goods, food, and resources through better design and continuous reuse so nothing goes to waste. The Seed to Table series is a low input growing initiative that goes through each of the steps required in a gardening journey. The classes and resources in the series will help you become increasingly self sufficient, save money, and reduce waste. I would now like to introduce our instructor, Joanna Tschudy. Joanna is the Society's Community Development Coordinator and a landscape designer who thoroughly enjoys combining her education in horticulture and visual arts with years of industry know how. Whether it in person or on the radio or television, Joanna loves sharing her expertise and helping Calgarians use their outdoor spaces to their fullest potential. Welcome, Joanna.
Thanks so much, Aki. And thank you, everyone. I'm not sure if you were here early enough to catch it, but I am so impressed. We're all out on a Wednesday night, out in the comfort of our homes. But thank you for joining us to learn about beans. And I think just to develop that excitement that we get in the springtime to get outside and start getting some soil under our fingernails. So today, I'm lucky to be sharing with you about a really important food plant that probably many of us have in our garden or want to have in our garden. Maybe we eat beans already, or we know a little bit about beans. I'm going to share what I know with you. And it's cool because this is all part of the Seed to Table series, different food plants that get us inspired. And I think this is one of the main reasons I love gardening. I feel like I know a little bit, and then I'm humbled. I'm always learning more, and it's all about the people that show up, what they share, what they bring to the table. So I'm lucky to be able to present. I love when people ask questions as they go. So if you want to raise a hand or type it into the chat, Aki or myself will get to your question. Or if it inspires something you want to share, please feel free. Um, you'll just have to um, not be shy to interrupt me though, because I've got my notes and the slideshow view, and I can't see anything else. So I'm going to leave it to Aki to cover the chat, but please don't be shy to ask. We'll also have a Q&A at the end. So if you want to save things to the end, that's great too. We'll have about 15 minutes or so to chat together at the end. Yeah, so we're talking about beans, and we're hoping that people will feel inspired to either dig in and get to know this food plant a little bit better, maybe start to relate to some of the other plants in the bean family, because there are quite a few in our area. And they all have similar traits, just like any family would show similar traits. So we can learn a lot even from the non-food producing members of the bean family. And beans are just cool. They're almost structural. When I think about how they relate to that circular economy piece, beans can provide shade. They can help cool down the side of a house or a seating area outside. They can help us spend more time outside. I think beans actually are a circular economy all in themselves. Just historically speaking, and how easy they are to grow and how much they lend themselves to seed saving, which ultimately, if you're doing it right and you're doing it long enough, it saves money. It helps you connect into your community a bit more. And so all kinds of connections can happen just through saving some bean seeds and trading them with friends and family and new folks. So yeah, and also it's this beautiful food plant. Of course, we know this. So whether you already grow beans or you're just learning how to garden, getting into beans and what they do in the garden will help you deepen your relationship with how you eat. And ultimately, that can be very circular economy-ish too. So yeah, let's get into it. I'm gonna start off with, let's see. Doing that. Okay, so Phaseolus vulgaris is the Latin name of most garden beans, the common name for garden beans. There's all different varieties though, and they are a member of the third largest plant family, flowering plant family. So there are tons of relatives. That's when I think about that, that's a lot of cousins all in one plant family, and you'll notice certain traits that carry through. Not all of them, but there's trees, there's shrubs, there's annuals, there's all different members of this huge plant family. And so we're lucky that we have, I just wanted to share with you some native, oops, I'm always hitting the wrong thing here. Oops, sorry. So right now you're seeing buffalo bean. Prairie buffalo bean is a native to us. This doesn't produce a bean that we might call like edible, like a typical bush bean that we'd grow in the garden, but it is doing similar things for pollinators and it's doing similar things in the root system, which I'll get into in a little bit. But often these are harbingers of spring. When you see buffalo beans starting to bloom and leaf out, especially in places like Nose Hill, or as you head out towards Kananaskis country or down in Fish Creek, or any kind of naturalized area along the river in the river valley, to me, this is like, okay, the bees are out. You can see the big bumblebee on this photo. And spring is happening, so we're less likely to be getting snowfall once these are blooming. Another one that I really like to find out in my walks is American wild licorice. And this is it's not as identifiable like bean-like, but it's got some really cool spiky seed pods that are really characteristic of the wild licorice plant. And so once you see them and you learn what they look like, you'll notice them everywhere. And again, they're in these naturalized areas. They're in areas where some of our natives can grow freely and unhindered. And you might even find them for sale or being propagated and traded around. So these are some cool plants that you could start to get to know. There's many, many others. For example, white prairie clover is another native member of the bean family, legumes. And then there's others that we might know they're not native and they're even invasive, but Caraganas, they're in the bean family as well. So there's many, many members. I don't have enough time to go through them all with you, but just wanted to start off with some that you might see as you're out walking around waiting for your garden to wake up. If you're taking some walks out in nature, you might start to see some of these cousins waking up sooner because natives can be like that. But the common bean, it just refers to, I mean, what's common to me might not be common to others, but it pretty well refers to anything that it would include legumes, pulses. There's different types of beans. There's pole beans, bush beans, runner beans, peas. These are all members of the same family. So, and different cultures have different names for them. They do different things with them. They grow them in different ways. And so I'm going to cover what I know and what I've learned. The bean is essentially the seed inside the pod, and often when you're eating a fresh bean, you're eating the pod as well. So there's a lot of fiber in those, but that's the edible part of the bean. And then not all of the pods would be edible. Like, there's shelling peas and there's shelling beans, and then there's fresh eating ones, and there's some that you might stir fry down a bit or pickle. So really, they have all these different traits that they've been bred for and that satisfy our palate or our tummies, and that's why we have so many varieties of them. And also, there's some that grow differently in different climates and different regions. So there's all of these sort of defining traits and reasons that we've carried along different traits in those beans in our breeding strategies as humans relating to beans. But yeah, in your venture with beans, you might hear about green beans, you might hear about fillet beans, Romano, wax, runners. So there's all different kinds, even within each type. So it's just if you like learning, beans are a really great place to start because it's all about what you're after. What kind of, and I would say if you're like, I don't know, just jump in, just dive in anywhere. Start with the first packet of seeds that you have in your hand and go from there because it's just this broad experience beyond that. And it's fun. Also, I love seeing that pollinators come to bean flowers and all the different types of bumblebees and honeybees. Mostly it's a bee type pollinator that will visit, but they're self-pollinating. Most garden variety beans are self-pollinating, so you don't have to worry about, oh my gosh, if we get wildfire smoke, maybe our pollinators are moving slowly or not even out at all, or if it's raining lots, you don't have to worry too much because those self-pollinating flowers will be producing. And the best trick for a large harvest is not necessarily great pollination for beans, but it's actually just consistent picking. So we'll get into more of that too. Let's see. Next slide. Oh, all right. So I titled it is the talk is advertised as all about beans, but this is kind of my nature. Kind of last minute, I was thinking, beans really they really love to give. I don't know if they love to, but that's what I notice about them. So if they had a love language, I would say beans would be gift giving. That's their love language for sure. And so the way I see beans, the gifts that I see from beans, there's so many, but I'll go over a few. They're super versatile. Like I said earlier, they're almost structural. So you can train them up a pole, hence the name pole bean. You can train them up tomato cages, especially if you flip them upside down. You can train them up a trellis, of course, like in this photo. But you can also, like, don't forget that your fences, your deck railings, these are all really great places to grow plants that like to climb and vine up things. So you might need to kind of tease them over or guide them over to a deck railing. But once they've latched on, they're going to give you some shade there or some privacy even. So they can be really cool in that gift giving way. They're very versatile. Bush beans, they're not a large plant, so you can tend to fit in a lot of bush beans in your garden. There's a bit of a smaller plant. So again, if you're looking at production or if you're really wanting to, if your goal is to pickle beans or to freeze a whole bunch of beans, then you could look at planting a bunch of different varieties and different types, and they'll help fill your pantry and fill your freezers. Yeah. So the next picture kind of shows, I like this photo. This was taken at the Springbank Community Garden. So they're high up and they get lots of the first brunt of our cooler weather. But this garden bed is really cool. It's got peas in the front and pole beans growing along the back. And what I saw when I was there is that this structure in the middle of the bed, I see this beautiful fence behind where and they will eventually plant beans there or something climbing, but in the middle of a raised bed, you can still go vertically. And what these beans were doing was shading. Some of you don't always think, oh, shades, that's not something we're after in a garden, but sometimes when we have intense sunlight or perhaps we know we're going to get hail, it's nice to have this sort of sacrificial structural plant that comes on pretty quickly and starts to fruit pretty quickly, and it can help save and buffer some of that bad weather or intense scalding sunlight for more tender crops like leafy greens or things that might get sunburnt. So I was seeing some really cool sort of symbiosis in this garden bed on the other side, on the east side of that structure, there's leafy greens, and it was really cool to see them doing very well in August. So generally, leafy greens are pretty well spent by then and getting bitter, but these ones were looking really lush. Um, when you are growing beans, oops, I think I Oh, there we go. Okay, sorry. I can see two slides at once. So I'm just making sure I'm not advancing too fast. Of course, one of the best gifts they give us is food. And so the key to getting a lot of food off of beans is to get out there and interact with them. They need to know that you're there. It's so funny. I find this often we're really, really precious in our vegetable gardens. We'll plant seeds and we'll sort of lovingly tend everything and sort of dote over everything. But it's almost like we forget to start picking. So beans can grow long and a bit fibrous before we sort of clue in and go, oh yeah, we better start eating these. So even if you pick them a little young, just start pinching them back. This is something that young kids learn or new gardeners. You don't really want to pull that bean. You want to pinch it or clip it at the stem. Sometimes if you pull it, you can yank the whole plant out, that's a sad thing because then it's sort of done if you can't get it to root back in, which is tricky. So go ahead and just start pinching them. Make it part of your daily practice. Walk through your garden or on your way to the garage or however you're passing by your plants, touch them. Get in there and eat a couple. Most beans don't make it out of my garden. They sort of fuel me while I'm doing other gardening work. But if I walk by, I don't care if my hands are dirty or if it just rained, I just sort of like brush it off on my sleeve or my pant leg and crunch down some fresh beans. And then when I'm touching the plant and interacting, sort of pulling on it gently, it's catching those movements and those senses to continue producing. It's noticing the relationship. And so if you're out there picking, the ones that are on the vine or are on the bush won't they won't become fibrous and tough. You'll be getting them when they're really nice and young and fresh. And so another gift, this is one of my favorites with beans. Speaking of relationship to beans, being humans and beans, that good friendship has gone back a long, long time in our human history. And so we have garden plantings. I think it's the ultimate companion planting, but you can call it Three Sisters gardening. And here's a picture of two of the sisters. The beans are on the backside, but the corn was planted so thickly that the beans kind of took a little bit to get out because they were shaded. So planting a Three Sisters garden is about timing and it's about which plants you're putting in. Traditionally, and I say traditionally because Three Sisters gardening comes to us from Haudenosaunee and Eastern Native tribes. So we're looking at the genius of plant breeding and trading and cultivating from an indigenous history. And it's not just a history. This is a living practice. This is people plant these gardens all the time. And they're really cool because the plants themselves interact in such a beautiful way. There's legend and story to it as well. So there's this beautiful cultural element. And then nutritionally, when you combine corn, beans, and squash, which is essentially what a Three Sisters garden is, you have a complete protein. You have a meal that is providing you with everything you need to be healthy as a human being, without having to go out and, you know, gather up all different kinds of foods or do some sort of intense hunting. You can simply combine these three foods together and you have what you need to continue surviving and thriving as a human being. But in the ground, in the garden, these plants are already showing this thriving interaction because you plant the corn, which is basically your pole for the pole bean, which you plant next. And last, you plant the squash, which comes up quickly, and those broad leaves on the squash shade the ground. They're helping keep in moisture, they're helping keep weeds at bay. Um, the sort of prickly nature of the squash stems and leaves also keep some pests away that might want to come in and eat up that corn and those beans. But yeah, so they all, when done, timed correctly and with lots of love and a little bit of space, it's a really cool way to grow a whole bunch of food in a fairly small space. Yeah, so a big nod to our indigenous growers and gardeners, because they're putting together this beautiful trio. And of course, other plants come in. There's often fourth and fifth sisters, of course. You might see like maybe it's hard to grow corn where you're at, so you could try sunflowers. So there's nothing strict about it, but it's beautiful to try that traditional planting of corn, beans, and squash. And then really, of course, because they're feeding us, beans are such an important source of protein. They're a vegetable, so we're looking at a much smaller environmental footprint when we're eating protein from a vegetable source. I won't get into the ethics and the politics of eating meat. I think your diet is your diet, but it's really cool that we have this gift from the bean family that will share this sort of lower impact protein. Aside from protein, beans have tons of fiber, which is really important for our digestion. They have iron, magnesium, lysine, potassium. They're low in fat and they have no cholesterol. So they're an important source of macro and micronutrients for our guts, and they make some of our most important foods around the world. I think when I say these foods, my kids wrinkle their noses, but they eat it anyway. But think of tofu. I love tofu. It's such a sponge for different flavors. That's made from soybeans. Tempeh as well. Hummus. Who doesn't love a good homemade hummus? That's chickpeas. Those are a type of bean. Dal is made from lentils. Dal is eaten around the world, but especially in Asia and India, that area of the planet. Super delicious, so many diverse different kinds. Even just sprouting beans. So bean sprouts are really important in a lot of our meals. And that's just a fun that you're eating a seed that just sprouted. So it hasn't even had to grow to its full potential, and it's already giving us something. And then as well, not just humans eat beans, they're a really important source of all those nutrients are really important for a lot of animal feeds as well. So we find a lot of our bean crops going into serving our animals. Yeah, so just another picture of some beans that I love. That was a harvest of beans mixed together in my hand last summer. I want to talk about one of the coolest gifts that beans give us. And, as a gardener, I say I'm always learning. So I'm not a scientist, but I've seen it in my own garden. And of course, I hear about it, and you probably have too. But they say beans fix nitrogen. And like, that's cool, but what does that mean? How do you fix nitrogen and what nitrogen and what does all that even mean? And why is that important to me as a gardener? Or why is that important to soil health? Why should I care about that? So, I've done a little digging on it and I found this diagram which helps. It's a little sciencey, a little nerdy. But if you've ever pulled up a clover plant or a bean plant, and I'll show the photo in a minute of the one from my garden, you might see these little white bumps on the roots if you can pull all the roots out. And those are little nodes that are rich in nitrogen. Okay, so what? Well, the nitrogen, when they say fixing nitrogen, it means that there's nitrogen in our atmosphere that makes up an important part of what we breathe, and it's plants are fixing that. They're taking it from the atmosphere, and it's coming into contact with the soil. And so, through the help of some awesome bacteria in the root zone of the plant down in the soil, they're having this gas exchange with the atmosphere and the soil. And so the nitrogen comes into the soil. Um, Even if the soil doesn't have a ton of nitrogen in it already, maybe it's a depleted soil. So the nitrogen still enters. And if the bacteria is present, it starts to take that nitrogen in more of a like an ammonia form of nitrogen. So don't ask me about that cycle, but that's happening. And then that it's like a trading is going on. So that now that ammonia form of the nitrogen is being traded into these nodes in the root of the plant because the plant actually needs that nitrogen to grow up. That's supporting a ton of vegetative growth. So it would be like maybe like calcium for our bones. We need calcium so we have strong bones. Well, the plant needs nitrogen to do its vegetative growth and to support its overall health. And so in exchange, the plant is doing photosynthesis and producing sugars and starches from that process, and they're trading. So the bacteria is getting fed their favorite stuff, sugar and starches, and then it's giving back this nitrogen. So it's not actually the bean plant that's fixing the nitrogen, but for some reason, the bacteria love hanging out on bean plant roots. So we kind of simplify things. I'm not going to do high school biology class. That's as close as I'll come to it, but I just think it's really cool how you can really nerd out with bean plants and you can get right into the stuff in your own garden. And I'll show you the picture of what it looks like in my garden. But it's so cool because let's say you're planting in a depleted soil, you want to plant beans, they'll go ahead and start that process. So, and often many of us have tougher soils that we're trying to amend and we're trying to improve all the time. And so if you can get beans into the ground and get them rooted, they're already started. Like they don't need any cue from us. They don't need fertilizer. They don't need anything extra. They just need to be in contact with the air, which they naturally would be, and they'll start this. So bean plants are doing it already for themselves, and then they do it so much that they have this extra nitrogen to share. And so that's why they do so well in a format like the Three Sisters garden, because corn, which it's growing, it's twining its way up, but their roots are near one another. And corn really feeds heavily on nitrogen because it's producing such a crazy amount of vegetation so fast. It's growing so much, so it's really feeding on that nitrogen. And wouldn't you know, there's that extra nitrogen from the bean roots. So it's a really cool thing. Oops, let's see, might have skipped. Sorry, let's see what that looks like. And so this is what it looks like. I pulled a they're fava beans. Sorry, I had to think for a minute. Cowpeas, fava beans. So I was growing fava beans last year and I wanted to see if they had those nodes on it. And sure enough, these little white spots are those nodes. So it's really cool to see like, hey, that's happening right in my own garden. I can do that research and try and teach myself what these cycles are all about. But then I see them right there. And so for me, if I grow those bean plants, I pick all the beans off I pick the things off of the plant that I want and I leave everything else. So I leave those root systems intact. I just pulled this up to get the photo. But I like to keep all that root system right where it is over the winter and as long into the spring as I can, sometimes even just chopping off the dead upper part of the plant and leaving those roots where they're at, seeding over top, and then topping everything with a little bit of compost. But yeah, the other thing about beans, like I said, if you can get them in the ground, they're already doing a service for the rest of your plants. So a lot of people will do something called crop rotation. And essentially that's just moving plants around or planting different things in the same spot every year. So if you planted corn in one spot last year, you won't plant it again there this year. And the idea behind that is that if there's, let's say, diseases or certain sort of pestier insects or fungal issues or something of that nature that is particular to that plant, it may start to accumulate there because you've planted the same thing year after year after year. So there may be some buildup of things that are a little harder to deal with as well. That plant is going to be, it's got its own favorite foods just like we do. So it's depleting the soil of those things that it's eating all the time. So corn, for example, would be taking a lot of nitrogen all the time, all the time, all the time. So if you're not replenishing the nitrogen, you just continue planting corn, that soil can get really drained of nitrogen and be hard to grow anything else in. So beans are often figured into crop rotation. And I like this you can try all different kinds of crop rotation. But I like the rhyme of this one. So the first year, and you could start with anything, but if your garden soil, and it depends on your soil, but if you're starting off with some tougher soil, I would plant roots first. So you do roots and then greens because greens have a shallower root system, so they're going to be pulling from different areas of the soil than the roots. The next season you do beans to replenish everything in the soil. And then after that, you would do fruits because the fruits are going to be heavier feeders on that nitrogen. So yeah, it's fruits, roots, greens, beans. It's nice because it's a rhyme and I can remember that easily. But look into crop rotation. It's a great thing, even and especially within raised beds. You don't have to be a farmer to do crop rotation. So it's just good practice in the garden. All right, so beans are not hard to grow. Aki and I were talking about how fun they are. I feel like if you didn't get to do this in kindergarten and you've never planted a bean seed, you should just get a pot of soil and push a bean seed into the soil and see what happens. It's that easy. Um, So any 5-year-old can do it. That means we all can do it for sure. They sprout or open up and germinate. The seed does usually pretty quickly, within 7 days or less. They're starting to bust open and find their little way up to the top of the soil. And they're really fun to watch. It's again, it's a place where you can kind of nerd out. It's a really cool thing to do. All ages can get into it. You can start to learn. You can, especially if you plant them in a see-through container, like a plastic to-go cup or something like that. You can start to see the roots forming. So those first roots, radicals. You're coming up with this new terminology. The seed, as it opens, creates this sort of like little first leaves or cotyledons, and then there's true leaves after that. So there's all this sort of vocab that's really fun to learn, and beans are so they're really defined. It's not hard to tell what are the cotyledons or, what does the true leaf look like? You can see it's very obvious. And they're often used in diagrams, so you can just literally Google it and have a look, and it'll probably be a bean plant that they've drawn out anyway. And the vocab, it's not just nerdy and fun, but these are terms that will help you throughout your gardening journey. So it's good to know what a cotyledon is. It's good to know what true leaves look like so that you can start to identify plants and maybe differentiate them from weeds that are growing next to them in the garden. So you'll hear gardeners toss around terminology like this, and beans can be your number one teacher of that. Beans teach me patience every single year. I want to get out there and throw bean seeds in the ground now, but I know better because they don't like cold weather. They really, rushing in nature never works. But it's especially true of planting beans. They're in our area, they're most often an annual, so they're also a really big, there's a lot of surface area to a bean seed. So if you put that in cold, wet soil, it's a lot of that cold, damp, acting on a pretty big area as in terms of seeds go, as far as seeds go. So that would probably rot the seed out, and it wouldn't even sprout because it's just too cold. It's the conditions for happiness are not being met yet, so you have to wait. I would say generally I don't even start thinking to plant beans until June, and even June can be like quite sketchy for weather. Last year we had tons of rain. It was chilly till quite late in the season, which was great for lots of plants, but heat-loving plants don't really like that too much. So you have to wait, and you will be rewarded for waiting. So yeah, but all you do, you generally just push the seed down into the soil. I like to say the size of the seed, like the length of the seed or width of the seed, just triple that, and that's how deep you go. So if it's a poppy seed, it's barely going to be below the surface of the soil. If it's a bean seed that big, it might go down to the depth of your finger. But generally, you don't want to plant them too deep. If you plant them too high, close to the surface, often they just get eaten. They'll get eaten by mice or birds. So you do want to give them enough of cover to kind of put down that root and start to get established. When you're going to plant beans, instead of sort of that timeline of June, I don't know, what did Joanna say again? Just look at the temperature outside. So if we're consistently sitting at like 12 to 15 degrees Celsius around the clock, so our nights have to start to warm up, that's when beans can go in the ground. And I would direct seed beans. There's not really much need to sow them inside because their season's pretty short, so you don't need to start them inside. It is fun just to observe and learn. But if you're going to plant them as a crop in your garden, just direct seed. That's the best way. They like well-draining soil. They like full sun. Um, just read the seed packet, get to know the plants that you're putting in. Bush beans can be anywhere from 2 feet wide or a little bit smaller to about the same height. Pole beans can grow to the top of your structure and then some. So make sure your structure is strong enough to hold them. Don't worry about having a really fancy, pretty trellis because it'll get covered anyway. So go for sturdiness, go for function over form with your trellises. Yeah, and so everything will be covered pretty fast. Let's see, I wanted to also show. I'm just seeing something come up in the chat. If there's any questions, I'm talking lots. Please feel free to go ahead and,
There is one actually
yeah.
just got posted. What does clarify?
Scarify? Yes.
Yeah,
Okay, I'm going to talk about that right now. So scar is kind of your cue in that word. Scarify means to actually scratch through the seed coat. And so this picture of these wrinkly little beans is how I do it. And you have to be, there's a few different ways to do this. So this is maybe like not beginner level, but I would encourage you to try. I always encourage people to experiment if they say, I don't, should I do it this way or that way? I say, do it both ways, and then you'll learn which way works better, or you'll learn, you'll tweak things a little bit as you go. Um, so scarifying means scratching or breaking through the seed coat before you plant them. This is not totally necessary. Bean seeds in the ground, they want to grow. All seeds in the ground, if they're alive, if they're viable, and the conditions for safe growing are being met, they will grow. So don't worry about, oh, I didn't put them in inoculant powder, or I didn't scarify them. Um, it might take longer for you to get to figure out what they like to grow most efficiently. But when you're looking at a plant that takes 50 to 60 days to mature anyway, it's okay. So take a deep breath and just know that it's going to be okay, even if you don't scratch the seed coat or you don't have time for that or you're not sure if you did it right. This picture, I'll show, so my method, and it seems a bit intense, but this works for me every year. So it's about timing. So I take my beans and I put them in a heat-proof bowl, like a ceramic bowl works great. And I get my kettle going, and once it's just off the boil, so it's not a rolling boil, it's just boiled, and I let it sit for a minute. I take that water and I pour it right over the beans that I'm going to plant outside. That sounds like we would be killing the beans, right? But you're not going to keep them in the water very long. As soon as they start to wrinkle, like you see in this photo, you're going to pour the water off and you're going to go outside, or maybe you're already outside, and you're going to plant them right away. So these beans look like my fingers after I do the dishes. They're wrinkly, they're kind of soft. That seed coat has already been jeopardized. It's open. There's no going back now for those seeds. So if I do this today, they're not going to be happy because they're out in the cold weather. The ground is too hard, it's too cold, it's too wet still for them, so they're going to just die. So I have to do this when the conditions are favorable for growing beans. So I would do this middle of June. Depending on weather, of course. I might look and see if the buffalo beans have blossomed and what kind of other cues I could get from nature around me to see if I'm doing it at the right time. But I've scarified my beans. Another way, if this feels too risky to you, and this literally takes like 20 seconds. So we're not talking about a long soak in the water. You pour the water over, they sit the time that it takes for you to go out to your garden, walk your bowl out to the garden, you're going to dump the water off. Don't burn your hands. It's usually cool enough by then. And then you're going to plant them right away. Another way to do this is toss them in a yogurt container where you've put a ring of sandpaper inside the yogurt container with the paper facing to the interior of the container. Toss your seeds in, put the lid on, and just shake it. It's you're not going to see like a super fine, you're not going to get through the seed coat, but it's just enough to start to cue the plant or the potential plant within that seed that it's time to start opening up. You're going to come, you scratch off just enough that it's going to give that little signal to the seed that, okay, we're going to open, we're going to do something now. So yeah, once you get them to this point, you're going to go ahead and plant them out, and that's what scarifying is. Um, yeah, and that's pretty much that's once you get them in the ground and they're planted and they start to come up, you may need to cover them. Often we'll see some birds are quite interested in these baby bean plants. Flea beetles can be a pest, so you may have to net them. Floating row cover is a type of netting, or even just some kind of mesh to keep, like European house sparrows tend to pull them up and shred them to bits. So you might need to cover them, especially frost. Keep an eye out for frosty, cooler nights. You might need to cover them with an upside down pot or floating row cover, or something that will keep the frost off of the plant or even just the cold air off of the tender new leaves. But once they're established and once the heat of the summer is on, just good consistent watering right through harvest, frequent harvesting, and that's pretty much all you need to know for planting beans. On the flip
Joanna,
side of, oh
before
yeah,
you move ahead, there's a
sure.
question.
Mhm.
What are these red and white beans on the screen?
Oh, I'm going to tell you all about them. I have one slide at the end that's my favorite beans, and they're in there. So I'll share the names of stuff in just a minute. And if there's no photo credit, they're my photos, so I can share more with you about that. I wanted to get to the end of the bean life cycle because that's often where we're eating them or storing them. And so it's really important to know what to do after the lushness of summer goes. And I'm going to start to pick up a little bit, just seeing that we're a little low on time. I can be chatty, sorry about that. So real easy with beans. Again, such a user-friendly plant in the garden. Just let them mature. Don't pick them. That's all you have to do is just don't pick some of them. Let them go past ripeness. These are pea plants in this photo, but they're dry, they're crispy, they're brown. If you shake it, you can probably hear the peas or the beans inside rattling around. That's your cue that they're ready to come out of the garden before frost hits, before we get maybe heavy wet snow or hail. You want to keep them undamaged. So you'll be bringing them inside and you're going to store them in a cool, dry, dark place. And that is the best way to store them for eating and the best way to store them for planting out the next year. Um, there's really, I mean, you're just gonna if you're storing them for eating, here's two tricks that I've found that work really well. Sometimes, even with our best intentions, we put them in an airtight container. We open that, to eat some dry beans or toss them in chili or cook them up, and there's little tiny bugs in there. And those can be a type of weevil. So if you can put a bay leaf in with your dried beans or hot chili peppers dried. Of course, everything's dry when they go in with the beans, and that helps keep some of the, I don't know if you can get weevils that way or if you're storing them in a place where sometimes that happens. We'll see it with rice sometimes, so that's something that can work. And then just to turn them into food, you're going to soak them. A lot of people are already familiar with this, but you would soak your dry beans usually overnight. You drain that water off and then cook them in fresh water, however you like to cook your beans. Um, yeah, and if you're storing them, you're just going to deny them of everything they need to grow. So keeping them cool, keeping them in a dark space, and keeping them dry. That's the most important thing. Label them, keep them away from where rodents can get them because animals would love to feed on your dry beans. So if you've got them in a garage or a basement space, just really be sure that they're protected from any kind of animal interest. And then, of course, if you're selecting them for gardening for next year, just make sure they're undamaged. Make sure that they look really healthy. There's no dark spots or miscoloration. Make sure that they went to full maturity. And you'll be able to see. Some of them will be kind of gimpy or kind of tiny or miscolored, and those are the ones that you just want to opt out. Those ones can go in the compost pile and just save the best ones. Yeah. And so ultimately, I mean, again, nods to big gratitude to people that have been trading and moving beans around our area forever and ever. And these are indigenous growers that selected beans from nature and started to breed them and trade them and gift them. So maybe beans learned from indigenous growers, I'm not sure, but it's just cool because to me, we're still part of that. When we plant beans, we're still part of that trade. We're still part of that gift economy. And it's really cool to see what comes out of different beans. So here's some beans. This is a picture my mom sent me from the tropics where she lives. She didn't even have to shell those beans. They just cracked open because it was so dry. And then here's some beans that I picked, and it's, nice beige, nondescript, dry seed pod, and look what happens when you open them up. They're so beautiful. So I'll jump right into some of my favorites. Dragon's tongue beans. These are a bush bean. I love heirloom beans, by the way. When I talk about saving seeds and trading beans and all this, you're going to want to do it with open pollinated or heirloom seeds. They will say so on the seed packet, or you'll have to do a little research if you're not lucky enough to get them in a seed packet. But dragon's tongue, um, they're just so dependable. When I want to taste a bean, they are what I think of. They are fresh, they don't get fibrous, they're beautiful. They have this purple seed pod, and that does go away if you boil them, but mine never reach the pot. I always eat them fresh. So dragon's tongue are cool ones to check out. Similar color, similar look, but these are a pole bean. They're called rattlesnake. Again, an heirloom pole bean. They never seem to, even no matter when you always miss some, but they're always so fresh. They're never very fibrous. This is a crazy radical picture. I haven't seen mine that purple. It's probably a filter on the internet, but I'll get pictures. I do have pictures of the seeds from scarlet runner beans, but they're huge. And if you get them before they get too big, they're actually quite tasty. The flowers bring in hummingbirds. The seeds are massive. That's not that far off of the size they actually get. So yeah, scarlet runner beans, beautiful climbing bean. Here's the picture of orcas. Those are the black and whites, and the Jacob's cattle bean. Again, those are both gorgeous bush beans. They're heirlooms. That was the picture of the seeds I showed you that were all wrinkly. They're just a beautiful little kidney bean. And again, when you cook these from dry beans, they do lose some of their color as well. But those are some of my faves. There's so many out there. Please start speed dating beans because those are just mine. And of course, this is totally unique to who you are and how you eat and what your family likes and what your diet's based on. But they're so fun to turn into food. I eat them fresh. That's the number one way. But you can blanch them or you dip them in, get them to a boil and then stop that boil and plunge them into that icy cold water to stop the cooking. That helps preserve the color, the greenness, and the texture. And then you can freeze them or dry them after blanching. Fermenting them, get into lacto fermentation. That's a whole nother class. Canning them, make sure you're following good instructions on how to properly can things. We're at a higher elevation here, so you want to get some good instruction. I love pickled beans. Aside from probably eating fresh or steaming them, pickled is third runner up for how I love to eat beans. You can make delicious relishes. Just dry beans, store some dry beans and have them ready through the winter. It's a beautiful way to keep the garden in your diet throughout the year. And then, of course, you can always turn them into like a value added recipe. If you want to get into making tofu and tempeh and miso and all those beautiful, amazing ways of preserving food, it's just such a cool way to connect with culture and to enhance your diet and to learn all the cool ways that humans hang out with food. But yeah, there's some pictures of my pickled beans. You can have them spicy. I throw a jalapeno in every now and then, some garlic. So there's all kinds of ways. But that is, aside from, this is my last slide. I say plant beans everywhere. I see some chat coming in. We're at 7:51, so I'm going to stop talking as much. But beans are amazing. Use them to fill in empty spaces. Use them to, be placeholders before your perennials grow in. Get them in the veggie garden. Get them up in planters. Put them everywhere, and you'll have beans coming out your ears, and you'll love it. And you can share them with your neighbors. So I'm just gonna stay steady right here. We'll go ahead and start Q&A. This is the evaluation feedback, and Aki, I think we're gonna put that in the chat as well.
I did
And
already, but we have
yeah,
some questions in the
okay,
chat. Do you want me to read them out?
sure, yeah.
So, can all types of beans be eaten in the pod or dried and cooked?
Not all types, no. So there's, for example, I find some Romano beans, they tend to be flatter. Those are really good cooked. I find when you eat them fresh, you end up with like a lot of stringiness. If you try to eat it, there's like that little bit of fiber that sort of becomes dental floss if you're not careful. Bush beans, there can be all different kinds. There can be wax, Romano. there's all different types, so you really just have to do a little research. This is when I say speed date beans, like get to know them, get to know what their textures are, why they're grown. If it says great for pickling, that might be a more fibrous bean, or great cooking bean. That might, that would be a less likely to be eaten fresh. But the seed packets will tell you most of what you need to know. And then of course there's all kinds of good gardening books out there. So not all beans are the same.
Thank
Yeah.
you. The next one, what soybeans grow best in Calgary?
Good question. I would say I don't have any variety names off the top of my head. I have not grown soybeans. I know folks who do grow soybeans, but they come 2 to 3 like beans seeds in a pod. So if you're growing them to shell them, it's a lot of work. Sometimes there's only one. So you have a lot of work to do when you're shelling all those beans. If you're growing them for edamame, I would look for one that says specifically edamame type, because those are the ones that you'd pull through. You'd pull that kind of as you eat edamame. But if you're looking to shell them, find ones that would have clues as to like many seeds in a pod, for example, would just be less work. And I would also look for shorter season. All of this would be advice for all beans. So beans that are going to ripen in 75 days or less. So that's from germination to maturity to harvest. So you don't want to wait much longer than 75 days or you might not get any beans. Yeah.
Thank you. Kathleen has a comment. Have you tried growing them next to onions? My poor experience last year doing so seems to confirm that they don't make good companions.
Yes, not so beans are not always every plant's best friend. Corn loves them because corn likes the gifts that beans bring. Onions are not the best. So anything in the allium family actually. So you're looking at garlic, green onions, bulb onions, um, even walking onions. They tend to be a bit competitive in the soil. So keep your onions and your beans apart.
Thank you. We have a comment from Jean. Last summer, I had a critter problems with my pole beans for the first time ever. I believe it was the wolves, and almost every night they chewed through a bean stem right down near the soil, just when the plants were starting to produce. So they basically killed my whole crop over the space over a couple of weeks, and I had almost no harvest. I'm wondering if you've seen this happen before, and I'm so curious if you or anyone has ideas for how I can deter the critters other than poisoning them, which I'm not keen to do.
Yeah, that's a
And it
great
goes on.
question.
Sorry, Joanne, just before. So Vortex beans are one of the most tasty and productive varieties, and they're open pollinated. I've grown Midori giant soybeans successfully.
Awesome. That's good. Okay, so well, there you go for soybeans. Midori Giant sounds like a good candidate. Thanks, Jean. And then, man, voles or rodents they can be such bummers because we're waiting for this prolific harvest and then they get to it first. So it's not fair. I've had issues with cutworms in my garden and I was taught to like to take an aluminum can or something that you can collar the base of the plant with. This may work with the rodents as well. If they're chewing the stem at the base, they're running around on the ground. They don't necessarily want to come up off the ground too much. So if you force them to do that by, say, taking something like a pop can, or a tin can like a tomato paste works really well because it's a smaller can, anything in the smaller size. So you're going to cut the top and bottom off and maybe with tin snips, be careful, wear leather gloves. You're going to cut up the middle or cut up the side of the can, or better yet, put the whole can, top and bottom removed, in sort of halfway or maybe a quarter way into the ground and push your bean seed down into that so that it grows up out of the can. That deters ground crawlers. So if you're looking at cutworms that are coming out at night and they'll cut right through the stem and it'll flop right over. That's usually when they're seedlings. It sounds like Jean's issue is more as the plants are maturing and producing. Um, but you could probably protect the stem that way as well. You could try You could try brushing the stem a bit with something nasty to them. It doesn't have to be poison. It could be something like Bobex or Plant Skid. They're sprays. I wouldn't put it anywhere near the beans that you're going to eat, but just spray it around where you're seeing the rodent damage, and that tends to drive away grazing mammals. So you could try some of those. My mom had all kinds of concoctions that involved rotten eggs and garlic and hot peppers and an old blender, and she would experiment with all kinds of things and had varying degrees of success. So there may be some more sort of homebrew type stuff that you could try. Yeah. And I see a question about
Thank
slugs.
you. Yeah.
Yeah.
So the other one is suggestions on how to manage slugs in beans. Last year, so
Mm.
many of my bush beans had been eaten by what I think was slugs, but not sure.
Yeah, slugs are tricky. So slugs, and the second comment here, I had a skunk drop by and it took out let's see, it took out all the voles in my yard. Skunks, people are freaked out by skunks, but they're awesome for slugs, for grubs, for voles. They drive everybody away. But they're feeding on a lot of the grubs and slugs and soft-bodied insects in our garden and our yard spaces. So encourage skunks. I don't know. We're recording. I'm not sure if I should say that. But with slugs, you'll know it's slugs if they leave kind of like a shiny, like a sheen, like sort of like a dried up slime. You'll see that kind of around. And also they sort of eat leaves away so they look a little bit lacy, or kind of jagged at the edges. With slugs, my best option for them, my best plan of attack for slugs is to trap them. And I literally just do it by putting a little board. It doesn't have to be big, just a plank, tiny offcut of wood, an old shingle, like whatever you've got around, something flat near the where you're having issues with slugs. They'll go under it because they're seeking refuge and they want to be out of the way in the heat, the sunny, hot part of the day. They'll go under there. You literally pick it up. You'll see 20 or 30, 10 slugs on it maybe. Tap them in the alley or in your compost bin or however you want to deal with slugs, feed them to chickens, whatever you've got. And you just sort of keep them, it's preventative, not preventative, it's sort of reactive. So it's not as preventative as I would like it to be. But then also with slugs, they like wet places. So if maybe you could spread out a little bit of mulch, something that would kind of soak up a bit of the moisture and hold it on the surface of the soil, that might be a good idea as well. And then I love the comment here that bobcats are great for bobcats are probably great for all the animals mentioned so far. They might make one sort of nasty skunk problem for a minute, but um, we just got a cat this year, and I'm curious to see on a leash how she does in our garden. I'm worried about our songbirds, but I also feel like little creepy crawly critters like voles and mice might become a bit more scarce with a kitty prowling around. But yeah, when we can sort of embrace or encourage a balance in our garden where let's say maybe we've put up some birdhouses for chickadees or finches, or we're planting sunflowers and we're seeing a lot more yellow finches or crossbills, suddenly we start to see less pest issues, or I see a lot less damage from things like caterpillars or other soft-bodied insects, because a lot of those birds passing through, um, they will also feed on those insects. And so it helps, it doesn't get rid of them, but it helps control them quite a bit for sure. And I thank everyone for spending their evening with me. It was so lovely to talk about beans. And thank you, Aki, for hosting us.
Very welcome. Thank you, Joanna. We've learned so much tonight. If you enjoyed this session, we have more upcoming sessions on What's Happening page on our Calgary website, calhort.org. Thank you for joining and have a great evening.
Thanks, everybody. Have a good night.